Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 33 of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host, Melissa Whitecross, coming to you live from Johannesburg. Despite the new normal of our load-shedding filled lives, we have ensured that you never miss a moment of the show, with all of our webinars recorded and available on YouTube for you to catch up on when you have your lights back on. Tonight, we will get to talk about one of my absolute favorite birds in the world. And so most of you should know it's going to be an absolutely fantastic hour filled with all things secretary birds. But before we get to that, just a reminder to communicate with us using the chat and Q&A feeds in Zoom or the comment feed on Facebook Live. And we'll be sure to answer all of your questions at the end of tonight's webinar. You can save the difficult ones for Christiaan. We are on all social media channels, and you can use the hashtag Conservation Conversations to let us know what you think of tonight's show. But a big thank you, as always, for the many generous contributions towards these webinars, which help to keep these shows free for all to learn and enjoy. You can simply visit the Cricut page or EFT BirdLife South Africa directly and use the reference webinars with your name. Make sure not to miss out on the Cycle in the Bush event, our foray on 2 wheels into Big 5 country in the Salati Game Reserve. This includes luxury accommodation and guided activities, as well as talks and interactions with BirdLife staff. There are limited saddles available, so do not miss out. All of the proceeds will be going to our regional conservation program, and you can get in touch with Bronwyn Marie to find out more about this fantastic event. We are getting ready to launch BirdLife South Africa's next major flock event, taking place at the Wilderness Hotel from 24 to 28 May 2023. There are lots of exciting birding opportunities on offer, as well as the biannual Learn About Birds event, which will include a science and layman's lab. And this will be taking place next year. BirdLife South Africa's AGM will also take place at this event on the Saturday, followed by a wonderful luncheon after the meeting. Be sure to visit our website to find out more. Bookings will be opening next month, so keep an eye out on our website and social media channels and book your spot as spaces are limited. But finally, on to tonight's main event. Tonight, we are going to be exploring the next chapter of the incredible Secretarybird project at BirdLife South Africa. Ernst Retief and Hanneline Smit-Robinson began this important conservation project back in 2011, and I had the privilege to take over the management of it back in 2018 when I started at BirdLife South Africa as the raptor and large terrestrial bird project manager. I've since handed over most of the reins to our new raptor and large terrestrial bird project manager, Dr. Christiaan Brink, who will be joining me tonight to share some of the newer elements of this project with all of you. But gratefully, Christiaan has allowed me to keep my fingers in the Secretarybird pie, and we're really looking forward to sharing some of the wonderful work being done on this species. Christiaan has worked on Marion Island as both a sealer and a seabird monitor for the then Department of Environmental Affairs. He also holds a PhD in conservation biology from the Fitzpatrick Institute at UCT and has a special interest in birds of prey. I'm certainly very excited to have Christiaan driving this work forward, and I know that you will enjoy hearing all about the progress that has been made since our previous Secretarybird webinar some 2 years ago. Christiaan, do you want to say hello to everybody while I get the show loaded, and we can take it from there?
Great. Thank you very much, Melissa. And yeah, hi, everyone. Looking forward to chatting to you tonight. And yeah, with that, Melissa, reins over to you. And yeah, warm them up for me.
No worries. Thank you so much, Christiaan. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. It's always a privilege to be able to talk about these wonderful birds and to share the incredible work being done, work that would not be made possible without the incredible support from our many different funders, in particular the Ngula Partnership and the Rupert Natuur Stichting, who have ensured that we are able to continue our conservation journey. We also have several collaborators who have helped us. Patrick Byholm from Novia University in particular has made some of our newer work possible, and we are grateful to Wits University for their support as well. So just a reminder, if you have not caught our earlier webinar, back on the 8th of September 2020, I did the very first Secretarybird webinar on conservation conversations and updated everybody on some of the work that we had done up to that point. But we were very lucky to be 2 years on, and tonight we're going to give you a bit of an update on that. But just in case you have not had the chance to watch this webinar, I'm going to quickly run through some background and some highlights, and then Christiaan will be taking it away after that. But be sure to head on over to our YouTube channel if you'd like to see some of the background to this project. So let's dive in, why don't we? One of Africa's most charismatic birds, and I'm yet to find someone who can challenge this claim. I mean, these birds really are the supermodels of the bird world. Just have a look at those long legs and that beautiful crest of feathers on its head, as well as the incredible eye makeup that dons the Secretarybird's face. What a stunner, and certainly an elegant bird to watch striding across our grasslands. The inspiration for many a logo, you can see the likes of BirdMap and BirdLife South Africa's new initiative, finding South African names for birds, and many other organizations using this bird as a cover model. Even a wine brand has taken on the Secretarybird, and I'm yet to get my hands on one of these bottles, but it is definitely on my bucket list. Fantastic to see the Secretarybird getting so much prestige and exposure. But without a doubt, the most prestigious place that the Secretarybird has been utilized is South Africa's national emblem. And you can see that beautiful bird spreading its wings over our nation, a sign of protection. And we are very privileged to have that bird on our national emblem. The other small emblem underneath there, for those of you who are geography buffs, you will recognize it as the Sudan national emblem, but only 2 countries in the world using the Secretarybird on their emblems, both African, because the Secretarybirds are found nowhere else. Back in 2019, the Secretarybird was lucky enough to grab the title of Bird of the Year. And if anybody would like to get access to those educational materials, they are still available on our BirdLife South Africa website. And if you are partial to the incredible fluffies that have been created with our Bird of the Year series, do get yours if you have not done so yet on our online shop, as well as those phenomenal pin badges that everybody loves to collect. So let's talk a little bit about the Secretarybird and its life history. These birds are long-lived in the wild, living up to approximately 15 years. The oldest known Secretarybird, who lived in captivity at the Hawk Conservancy Trust and did many incredible shows, unfortunately passed away in March this year at the tender old age of 34 years. And we wish Madeline and his keepers a wonderful tribute for all of the people they inspired with their many different shows. Very, very sad to have lost an incredible ambassador for the Secretarybird species earlier this year, but what an incredible milestone to reach 34 years old, the oldest known Secretarybird for all time. They weigh in at approximately 3.5 to 4 kilograms, and our study back in 2019 found that the age of first breeding can take place as early as 2 years and 9 months, which is relatively quick for a very large terrestrial bird. They also have an incredible wingspan of approximately 2 meters. We see them more walking around on the ground, where they stand at a meter and a half tall, being the tallest raptor in the world. But to see them flying overhead is truly something spectacular, and one can often confuse them with the likes of cranes and herons as they soar over one's head. But a quick glance at that diamond-shaped tail with the long streamers coming off and those beautiful black underwings, you should realize very quickly that you are looking at the majestic Secretarybird. Now, I mentioned they like to stride approximately 20 to 30 kilometers a day, and our tracking data is showing even more impressive distances than that. But these birds are truly the endurance athletes when it comes to speed walking in South Africa. They're not only endurance athletes, but incredible hunters. I mentioned Madeline, and he was part of an incredible study back in 2016, which showed that these birds are able to deliver a blow that is 5 times their own body weight. Now, I said they weigh in at around 4 kilograms, so that is a serious amount of force coming down with pinpoint accuracy on the head of their target, in this case, a rubber snake. And you'll notice when the bird was kicking that it keeps its eyes open, it does not close them, and that allows it to keep a very, very good lock on its target and deliver that fatal blow. They are incredible hunters, capable of taking a variety of prey. Their main diet, interestingly enough, actually consists of locusts, but they are capable and famous of eating snakes, making up only 1% of their diet. Incredibly, these insectivores take an amazing 87% of their diet in from things like locusts, arthropods, beetles, and spiders. So a very, very important food source for them. Now, if you've ever watched a secretary bird hunting, you will see they use those very keen eyes to spot prey and then deliver a fatal blow, in that case, catching a very large locust. But wonderful birds to watch in the field, and certainly their very, very quick kicks are what allows them to be able to catch very fast moving prey. And you can see this bird stomping through the bush trying to capture a very, very small mouse who was trying to evade them. Now, this bird is only found within Sub-Saharan Africa. You can see the yellow blob there scattered through the savannas and grasslands of our beautiful continent. They do not do well in forested habitats, and they do not do particularly well in completely desertified landscapes either. They need that beautiful grassland, open plain to really do well. Now, if we have a look at the eBird data, much of our more recent sightings are coming through from Southern Africa and the beautiful parks that are famous in the East African bloc, the likes of the Masai Mara and the Serengeti. Unfortunately, if we look at the trends of these birds across the continent, these are showing some of the declines that have been noted within the last 30 years. And the biggest thing that should jump out to you there is that in West Africa, it is suspected that secretary birds are all but locally extinct. Massively concerning declines. The most recent of these declines was assessed in East Africa, where 94% of their birds across East Africa appear to have disappeared in the last 30 years. Very, very scary what is going on out there. A little bit closer to home in South Africa, we can see that we are teetering between 75 to 80% of our secretary birds disappearing within the last 3 decades. I remember as a child driving between Durban and Johannesburg and frequently encountering secretary birds in the grasslands that lay the way along the N3 highway. Today, I'm lucky if I see one on every 5th trip that I take. It is very scary what is going on out there. And unfortunately, all of these declines were worthy of a status change, and we had to uplist the secretary bird to endangered in 2020, along with several other raptor species in Africa. A hugely concerning finding and a warning bell for us as conservationists and humanity that something is going drastically wrong on our continent, and we've got to do something about it. But luckily, we have wonderful people who have foresight and have certainly gone out there to do what they can to try and save this bird and the species. And I must give huge credit to my colleagues Ernst Retief and Hanleen Smith-Robinson, who back in 2011, when secretary birds were first uplisted to vulnerable, had the vision to begin what is now the BirdLife South Africa Secretary Bird Project. And despite the species being very well known at the time, the knowledge about its biology and ecology was limited. And there was this big need to push for more research to begin really quantifying the science behind our conservation decisions. And in more recent years, I had the privilege of taking over this project. And in even more recent times, Dr. Christiaan Brink has joined the fray. And together we are doing what we can to drive this important conservation project forward. And the big aim of this project really is to implement those priority conservation actions that are going to ultimately benefit our secretary birds and ensure that their habitats are conserved and create an environment where these birds are able to thrive using effective science and implementing great conservation action that really does result in secretary birds being a flagship species for our grasslands and all of the incredible birds that utilize this wonderful biome, as well as being an inspiration for the landowners and the farmers working this landscape alongside these wonderful birds and creating that connection to want to do more to preserve our wonderful grasslands and the secretary birds that live in them. So I'm going to take you through some of the earlier objectives of this project. Between 2011 to 2019, our real focus was to try and understand what was going on with the species when these birds left the nest. So there was some really nice data looking at breeding productivity, a lot of work done by Dawie de Swart and colleagues monitoring nests, seeing how many chicks were raised and putting rings on them. Unfortunately, rings and ring recoveries can be very, very few, and we only received 4 different ring recoveries in the space of approximately 15 years. And what we needed to do was really up our understanding of what was going on with these birds when they left the nest. Now, just to quickly give you an overview of what happens, secretary birds will build a very large stick nest in the top of a flat bush or shrub or small tree. You can see there a wonderful carpet of a mixture of grass and sticks. They can lay up to 3 eggs, which are incubated over the period of 42 to 45 days. And when those chicks hatch, they are nestlings for approximately 10 to 14 weeks before they are able to then fledge. And over this period, they go from looking like weird, fuzzy aliens to miniature, feisty secretary birds. And after approximately 4 to 6 months, they will disperse from their nest, having fledged at approximately 10 weeks old and wandering around the nest to explore this new world that they find themselves in. And we really wanted to know what happened to them after that. So the incredible advent of tracking technology allowed us to fit tracking devices to 10 different birds. And we're very grateful to everyone who made this study possible back then. You can see we covered quite a variety of landscapes across South Africa, all those different colorful dots showing the various tracks of our birds across the country. And we were able to publish this in the first of many publications to come, looking at the dispersal dynamics of juvenile secretary birds. And that was largely what our previous webinar was about. So I'm not going to go into those results tonight because we have a lot more to share with you. But what we've spent the last couple of years doing is really expanding this project to get a better handle on what is going on with our birds. And you can see there all of the new additions to our fleet. These are wonderful, wonderful creatures to get close to, and we've really tried to spread out our tracking into new landscapes, targeting some of the habitats that we previously had not tracked birds in. And I'm very excited to share that Letitia Steinberg and the BirdLife Northern Gauteng Club have been supporting us to expand this even further with particular focus on our arid secretary birds. And Christiaan's going to go into that in a little bit more detail just now. But let's talk a bit about our protected area network. Now, when we did our initial study, we found that very few of our secretary birds were actually utilizing the protected area network in South Africa. Currently, just shy of 9% of South Africa falls under some kind of formal protection. You can see all the dark green and light green areas there. If we dissolve those and put all of our secretary bird tracking data from those first 10 birds, a mere 3% of our tracking locations were located within any formal conservation space. And this is really important to note because it gives us an opportunity to look beyond the formal conservation space. And it gives us an opportunity to engage with private landowners and to empower them to become conservation custodians on their properties. And there's wonderful new protected area mechanisms, the likes of other effective area-based conservation measures or OECMs that are giving way to these new landscapes to become conservation recognized landscapes for our biodiversity. But if we have a look at those protected areas one more time, the atlasing project that's been carried out, Turning Kruger Green, has really been a phenomenal resource in telling us what is going on with our birds in the Sandparks landscape. Unfortunately, over the last 20 years, it is not a pretty sight. Our secretary birds have gone from roughly 20% reporting rates across the park down to a mere 0.4% of reporting rates in that landscape. And there's many reasons for it. Probably the big three being when these juvenile birds disperse out of the park, the multitude of threats that face them in a very transformed landscape result in these birds dying before they're able to return back to the Kruger landscape, where they would be able to breed and recruit back into the population. We also know that the landscape of Kruger is changing. We're seeing increased woody density. We're seeing impacts from elephants with nesting trees being knocked over. There's a whole range of complexities at play within our national park. But the end of the day, the story that comes out of this data is that many of our large terrestrial birds are taking strain within these national parks. And that really means we need to start looking carefully at how we can conserve them beyond the formal protected area landscape. And just some interesting data that came out while we're talking about Kruger. This was part of Megan Lofty-Eaton's PhD, and it really is a fantastic look at what is going on when a national park or an area shifts from being a very open landscape, largely dominated by grassy species, to becoming a woodland or savanna with a lot of trees present. And what you see on the graph on the left there in the red box is what is called the Jacobs index. And along the bottom, it's indicating the percentage of trees within a given area. And what she found was that in areas with less than 20% tree cover, secretary birds were able to persist and were observed using the atlas data. Unfortunately, the minute our tree density goes above 20%, secretary birds rapidly disappear from the landscape because they need those open areas to move. They're a bird that likes to walk, and they certainly can't keep getting hooked up in things like your sicklebush and acacias, which are so prolific and invading an area. And this has resulted in an over 70% decline in our secretary birds within Kruger National Park back in 2014. And as you can see with that latest SABUP data on the previous slide, that has probably even gone up. Very, very concerning for our national park in the east of the country. But this is also, unfortunately, a story that we observe over much of South Africa. In the recent National Biodiversity Assessment, some very scary statistics have come out, and we've seen that 60% of our grasslands have been lost by 2014. Approximately 40% of those are irrecoverably transformed. We are not going to get those grasslands back. And if we look at over 30% of these grasslands being lost to things like cultivation, the planting of corn and forestry, we're seeing huge challenges for our open spaces as we move into this new era of needing to feed our population, and also the new threat of things like renewable energy having an impact on these open landscapes. We also know that woody cover has doubled in our grasslands since the 1940s, and that too is putting a lot of pressure on our secretary birds and other open landscape utilizing species. So with just under 1 million square kilometers of intact habitat in 2014, what is that picture going to look like for our secretary birds? And I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Christiaan Brink to walk you through some of the population monitoring work that we're doing to try and understand and answer that question. Thanks, Christiaan.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Eloquent and fluid delivery as always. For those who don't know, Dr. Whitecross is quite a tough act to follow, but I'm going to do my best. So yeah, and the first step in a lot of conservation projects is population monitoring, because that's sort of the baseline information with which we assess whether a species is at risk of extinction. And also importantly, it is also the baseline information with which we monitor the impact or the long-term effects of some of our conservation actions. So quite an important information to have, but also quite difficult information to get for such a wide-ranging and wide-occurring species. So of course, we couldn't do it without the help of citizen scientists to basically feed us data with which to do research and monitoring research. There we go. So basically our science and innovation team have been using such data, such as that from BirdLife and the SABUP, the South African Bird Atlasing program, both then comparing the second one and the first one. So basically looking at the differences in reporting rates across roughly 3 decades. And on the left there, you can see some preliminary results from this research. And you can see the map showing the pentads where reporting rates have gone down in red. And you can see they're quite widespread. And then the yellow sites or pentads are the places where reporting rates has stayed the same. And blue is where they have increased. And gray, of course, where birds have not been recorded. So as you can see, the overall trend seems to be declining. And that's also what's shown on the right-hand side there. Now, those graphs just basically show changes, the overall changes, that first line in range and the second line in reporting rate, and everything to the left of the 0 line, which is all of it, basically indicates a significant downward trend. So quite worrying what we're seeing. And then, of course, in the past, we have done some, and I believe we have shared some habitat suitability modeling where we used what is called maximum entropy modeling. But given that this is science, it's always evolving, new and more accurate techniques come out, and our science innovation team have also moved forward and now redone some of this modeling and prediction using machine learning techniques such as random forest modeling. And what you can see on the screen there is the results of that. But basically, in a nutshell, they're using occurrence and absence data, as well as the habitat characteristics, things like climate variables and land cover variables, to then basically model and predict where we'll find secretary birds or where suitable habitat potentially is. So that left-hand map there basically shows you the probability of occurrence based on our preliminary models. And as you can see, quite widespread with quite significant representation within our grasslands, as well as the Kalahari coming up quite highly as well. On the right, you can see a proxy for abundance. Now, here it is actually our predicted reporting rate, which we're using as a proxy for abundance. And so basically the more yellow areas is where we predict, or our model predicts there to be more secretary birds. And what is quite interesting is, given the declines that Melissa mentioned in the Kruger National Park, is that while it comes up strongly as being an area in our model where secretary birds occur, it also comes up as an area where abundance is relatively low currently. So quite interesting to note. Beyond this, we're also now working towards using this type of data to make predictions about, or estimates regarding, what the population size is. Our estimates are still quite variable, as we're still trying to figure out what the best, most accurate and the most defensible technique is to do this. But that's what we're working towards. And then, of course, we're also managing a national database on nest sites, which we continuously try and update. So if anyone knows of any nest sites, please go onto our website, the Secretarybird page. You'll see there a link to our online reporting form where you can fill in information on nest sites. Please record the coordinates. They are very important. And this basically allows us to monitor breeding and breeding output sort of at a national level. And we try and check up annually with all the nest sites in that database, just to see whether the birds bred this year, to look at things like nest site fidelity and those types of things. And currently there's roughly 80 records in the nest site database. So, of course, we know broadly what habitats secretary birds function in or live in, but we need to tease apart sort of the nuances around what is a healthy grassland or healthy habitat for secretary birds, and what are the predictors that predict them to basically live in those areas, and in what types of habitat is the habitat more saturated with secretary birds. Those types of information. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Melissa just to discuss some of our analyses, as well as some other projects done by some other organizations and individuals.
Thanks, Christiaan. Yes, so this is some of the newer research we've been looking at, trying to understand what is going on with secretary birds' habitat selectivity. But as with all good science, it's always good to refer to the literature. And Sally Hofmeyr back in 2014 did a fantastic analysis using the wonderful coordinated avifaunal road count data. And for those of you who do participate in this kind of citizen science, this data are so important for us to be able to understand what is going on in these different landscapes over time. So thank you for your contribution. And interestingly enough, you can see all of those green bars, which are really referring to what we call veld, or open grassland type landscapes across all of our provinces. Unfortunately, down in the Western Cape, the Overberg and Swartland regions, where historically renosterveld was the dominating vegetation type, this has been switched over to wheat fields and canola fields, and these birds do something slightly different and have to rely on those fallow fields and pastures to be able to survive. So the Western Cape, a slight exception to the rule, but our secretary birds nevertheless being able to eke out a living there. And just to show you some of the tracking data, you can see our bird Taimane from his natal nest up near Warden, spending a lot of time foraging in certain areas along his dispersal journey before settling in an area where he ultimately had his own nest and was able to produce 2 chicks successfully at under 3 years old. So we were really interested in trying to tease apart what these foraging islands meant for the ecology of these secretary birds. And you can see one of our other track birds, Bling, who spent a lot of his life in the Pretoria region, eking out any fragment of grassland, literally walking along the N1 highway at times, utilizing those open patches of grassland that remain in what is now a highly fragmented northern Gauteng landscape. And we were interested in trying to understand what these fragments mean for these secretary birds and what they can teach us about these different ecosystems where they are able to forage and spend time and survive. So we started looking at the way these birds move within these systems. You can see Bling there, moving along a wetland system between 2 informal settlements, never venturing into the human habitated landscape, but very much making use of those natural landscapes. And we then decided to give a very baseline foraging island quantification. If a bird spent at least 48 hours in an area, and that area happened to be at least 5 kilometers from the next foraging site, we would declare that a foraging island. And we looked into trying to analyze how big these foraging islands were and how long the birds are spending time within these foraging islands. And we started finding some interesting trends across our different biomes. Remember, our biomes are simply a collective vegetative unit, and South Africa has 9 of them. The big green blob you can see in the map there being our grasslands, and the yellow swathe around the northern part of the country, the famous savannas, the likes of Kruger Park and Marakele might spring to mind. But what we found, if we look at this graph, at the bottom, we're showing the area used. Along the left-hand side, the number of days that these birds were spending within our different biomes. And we found that grasslands were by far the largest areas of foraging habitat suitability, which is fantastic because that means that our secretary birds still have enough area to forage within this biome. Unfortunately, our savannas, a little bit less in terms of area available, but spending a similar number of days to our grasslands, roughly 12 days per foraging island. The fynbos, on the other hand, had birds spending approximately 25 days in their respective foraging islands, which were the 3rd smallest category, and by far the smallest area of use and the shortest utilized were those of the Nama Karoo, likely because our Nama Karoo is an arid landscape and conditions are not always suitable, so birds have to forage a lot further to get their energy requirements. We also started to look at what is going on around these foraging islands. And interestingly, speaking to what we said earlier about our birds utilizing areas outside of protected areas, 62% of the buffer zones around where these birds were foraging was dominated by agriculture and forestry. 37% of these islands had some level of natural habitat around them, and approximately 1%, largely linked to the availability of water through things like artificial dams and surge ponds, was made up of anthropogenic infrastructure. So this is still early days. We're hoping to do a lot more with our ecological research. We're certainly going to be teasing apart some of the incredible technology available to us using things like satellites to infer what is going on with the vegetation where these birds are. And we're also hoping to start looking at connectivity within our grasslands for these large birds and trying to figure out how best our conservationists can plan to support them. And then finally looking at prey availability within these fragments and trying to understand if bigger fragments do indeed support better secretary bird survival. So that will hopefully be in 2 years' time. We can share that next chapter with all of you. But I'm now going to hand over to Christiaan to take you through some of the really exciting stuff we have in store for the Secretarybird project and some of the amazing developments over the past 2 years. Thank you, Christiaan.
Thanks, Melissa. So like Melissa just highlighted, we're trying to identify what habitat remains to secretary birds. But of course, in order to invest our resources and attention effectively, we also need to know which areas are still going to be suitable to secretary birds in future. And of course, here I'm talking about climate change. So the map on the screen there on the left is of the current range or distribution of secretary birds. And this research has been done by Durham University, which has done sort of broad scale analyses of predicted range contractions for various species, secretary bird being one of them. And you can see on the right there, their predicted range by 2085. So basically the green areas would be the range at that point, with the blue areas on the right being basically the areas that have been lost to secretary birds. Now, of course, like I said, this is quite important. It doesn't help us to invest a lot of conservation resources specifically for secretary birds in an area that might in future, due to climatic changes, no longer be viable habitat for the species. Of course, climate change isn't something we as an NGO can necessarily stop and manage for the species. So we sort of have to strategize about how best to invest our resources. Oh, nope. I clicked way too many times. So basically what we did is we now started a project where we got with the University of Cape Town as well as the University of Pretoria. And what we're doing is we're going to be investigating the effects of climate change on secretary birds. And we were very lucky to get Professor Andrew McKechnie and Dr. Susan Cunningham on board, two very esteemed scientists with a lot of expertise on avian thermoregulation, physiology, as well as the ecology of these birds around that live in these extreme arid environments and have to deal with extreme heat events. So we have them on board, which we're very happy about, as well as a very promising PhD student, Wesley Gush, and we're looking forward to him starting this project at the start of next year. And in future, we want to basically try to utilize our universities more to do the research for us so we can focus on the on-the-ground conservation. And yeah, it's a great opportunity for students as well to do research that has practical conservation value. So yeah, for all the students listening, we are working on a list to provide you with research that we very much, a wish list of research, if you will. So basically this project, like I said, is going to assess the effect of climate change. And we're hoping to do this through various Research methods, the one being our tracking study. Now, what we want to do with our new devices or the additional devices we wish to deploy is get accelerometer data. Now, accelerometer data is very useful, as in it will allow us to basically identify the behavior of the bird as well as its movements. Now, what I mean by that is actual behavior such as flying or resting or foraging, that type of thing. So what an accelerometer does, it pretty much measures movement on a three-dimensional scale. So on 3 different planes, as you can see on that meerkat over there, basically on a y-axis, an x-axis, and a z-axis. And what you get is these signatures in the data, which you can then use machine learning techniques to apply to identify behaviors. So you can see there on the right, those quite up and down signatures is the meerkat running, where when it's flatlining, it's pretty much resting. Now, it's this type of device or features on devices that also allows us to identify if birds potentially died. So additionally, what we want to do is put birds in thermal chambers to look at their thermal thresholds, you know, the points at which the temperatures at which they start panting, or displaying physiological adaptations or behavior to dissipate heat. And then, of course, we also want to put on nest cameras to observe adults' provisioning rates, how often they bring food back to the nest, as well as having temperature loggers in those nests to look at the behavior of the chicks during different temperatures. You know, at what point are they panting, how long are they panting, and using all of this, we want to come up or predict if secretary birds will be able to stay in certain environments in the long term. Specifically, we want to test this sort of in the Kalahari region. Of course, there's extreme heat events. And the reason for why we think focusing on this area is that's a likely area where they might start feeling the pressure of increased temperatures. So with that tracking data and the behavior data, we can start looking at things like foraging windows being squeezed. You know, they might only have early morning and late afternoon when it's cooler to be out in the hot sun foraging. And if we have continued increased temperatures for longer, that might have shorter and shorter foraging windows. Now, this, of course, like I said, will help us predict which areas is the best for us to invest in securing that habitat for secretary birds. So, of course, then we'll also have to assess all the threats to secretary birds, as well as ways in which to mitigate them. So part of the reason we focused on tracking juveniles is also because this is the age class at which most raptors experience the most mortalities. And basically, all these birds are the ones that we've tracked in our tracking study. And as you can see, quite a significant number of them perished within their first 2 years, not reaching adulthood. And all the ones, well, the ones with the yellow outline crosses were natural deaths, but the others were all deaths caused by anthropogenic causes. So it's a dangerous landscape out there for both adult birds and dispersing young juveniles. And unfortunately, their structures, such as linear infrastructure, such as power lines, pose a significant threat to the birds. Over the last 20 years, we've had about 100 records of secretary birds colliding with power lines, and we have also lost 3 of our tracked birds to this threat. So we are collaborating with the University of Helsinki to basically get a student onto using some of our tracking data to come up with a risk map to inform Eskom, and so that they can have a heat map of the areas that's the most risky to secretary birds regarding power lines, and that they can focus their mitigation work in those areas. So, of course, another linear infrastructure that's quite an issue is that of fences. It's not just secretary birds that are susceptible to this. but other birds as well. With secretarybirds and sort of your larger crane type species, what can often happen if the line doesn't have proper tension is a bird can fly over the line with his legs hitting that top line, and then sort of him dropping down and his foot getting caught underneath the wire, just underneath that. And then as you can see on the screen there, they get pinned and they unfortunately hang there until they die. And for other species, being snagged on these barbed wires are also unfortunately a risk. So what we're doing is we are also investigating how this linear infrastructure is not only a threat to their to potential cause of mortality for the birds, but can also influence their normal foraging behavior and movements. As you can see on the left there, the birds keep knocking against some of these linear infrastructures, and it definitely alters their movements. So we're starting a wildlife-friendly fence trial in October at Middelpunt Wetland. On the left there, you can see the now nature reserve. And here is where the wetland extends from north to south. And what we're going to be doing is testing out a new wildlife-friendly fence design along this red line. And we're going to be putting camera traps on this line, as well as a normal cattle fence line, to basically compare the permeability of our fence design with that of a normal cattle fence. On the right there, you can also see why we want to test the fence there. The wetland is currently threatened by cattle, and also the current fences around the wetland are causing entanglements such as the owl at the bottom there. So there, I'm going to be doing this along with my colleague, Dr. Carl Lloyd, and there you can just see our current fence design. Basically, the main characteristics is a plain top wire, as we found that most of the entanglements, especially the snags and the impaling of birds' wings, happen on that top wire. So we're making a plain wire to prevent that, as well as creating a bit more space underneath this fence to allow more permeability for your smaller animals and antelopes. So in order to support sort of our fence line project and mitigation, you can also report any fence entanglements that you come across. Again, on the Secretarybird website page, you'll find a link to an online reporting form where you can report this. Now, this helps us identify the problem structures, as well as gauge the scale of the problem. So another thing we in the future want to look at, and that's a problem that we really haven't assessed or don't have a good handle on, is that of pesticides. So we're thinking of starting an eco-toxicological project as well. Every year, globally, we're pumping more than 3.5 million tons of pesticides into the environment. And South Africa is the largest pesticide user in Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, the reason why that is a problem is, on the one hand, because a review of a bunch of studies pretty much indicated that overall we can expect that insect populations have declined by roughly 45% over 4 decades. These are quite difficult estimates to make, but all indications are that there is a large decline. And of course, our secretarybirds, as Melissa highlighted, one of their main prey items is some of what is considered by landowners as pest species, things like locusts and also grasshoppers, which are often controlled via pesticides as well. So secretarybirds are feeding on this, as well then as your well-known problem with rodenticides. Now, of course, that can lead to the bioaccumulation or biomagnification of these pesticides and pollutants within our birds, which can have lethal or sublethal effects, including things like reduced reproductive output, as well as things such as egg thinning, as we have seen with DDT in the past. Now, bioaccumulation basically just means that over time, as an animal continues to consume food that contains these pollutants, the concentration thereof builds up within their system. And biomagnification points towards the increasing concentration of pollutants as you move up in the trophic scales or levels. And of course, secretary birds being sort of at the top of that, we can suspect that they potentially are having higher concentrations of these pesticides in their systems. And just to highlight the potential scale of the problem, Smith and Bowman did a study where they caught 20 raptors and tested their blood for pesticides, and they found pesticide residues in all 20 raptors' bloods. That's why we're working towards potentially getting an ecotoxicology project manager to start addressing this issue. So looking at how we starting to translate our science into conservation action, one of the big things we have coming up is the development of a species action plan, both a national one, and we're hoping to, in the long term, get a regional one as well. So what we're doing is we managed to secure a roundtable discussion at the Pan-African Ornithological Conference. And what we're hoping to do is to put secretary bird conservation on the agenda of a lot of organizations at a regional scale throughout Africa. Of course, being such a widely occurring species and ranging species, we're going to require collaboration and help across the range if we're going to effectively conserve it. We've also managed to secure a commitment from the IUCN, from the Conservation Planning Specialist Group, to help us facilitate population habitat viability analysis, which is pretty much just a workshop with a lot of stakeholders to try and come up with this species action plan by pooling all the available expertise. So we're also in future going to develop, starting to develop species guidelines specifically for things like wind farm developments. We have those preliminary indications of buffer sizes around nest sites, specifically looking at the movements of young birds before they disperse from their nest sites. One of the sort of areas we need more information on is adult movements around a nest. Of course, they'll be susceptible to wind farm collisions, wind turbine collisions as well. And this recently there's been another collision. So there's an issue that we'd like to address by providing developers with the guidelines on how to effectively mitigate their projects with regards to secretary birds. And of course, BirdLife always consults and comments on developments in potential problem areas as well. So currently our buffer around the nest site based on the chick movements are 2 kilometers, but as I said, we're still developing those guidelines. Then we're also trying to do a lot of awareness work around fence line mitigation strategies. Like I said, it's really that top wires or that top 2 wires that's the big issue. And so the number 1 solution is just to remove all fences that you don't require. So we urge landowners to just, if they at all can, please remove fences that aren't required. Also fence management with regards to maintaining fence tension so that we don't get situations such as there on the right with the secretary bird being caught. Then especially in problem areas where you might have noticed bird entanglements, please put up flappers or visual deterrents such as that center photo there. Then of course, like I said, a plain wire for the top strand will go a long way in addressing this issue. And please look into alternative barriers. And then also thank you very much to BirdLife Gauteng Bird Club, who's assisted us with some of the dissemination of this awareness material. Then we're also aiming to increase our capacity within the Secretarybird project in 2023. Currently, there's me with assistance from Melissa, and I manage a portfolio of 4 to 5 species conservation projects. So we really want to increase our capacity to increase our output and our impact. So that's why we are currently looking to hire a Secretarybird Conservation Officer. And his role would be to have sort of this increased on-the-ground presence and engagement with the agriculture sector, both with landowners, building communication networks and relationships, as well as with farmer associations and hopefully other agriculture industry role players. And basically to then use this network to ensure the implementation of the species action plan points and the uptake of management recommendations to ensure that privately owned land remains safe habitat for secretary birds. You will also, of course, be very involved with data collection and monitoring, so the monitoring of nest sites, specifically within our grasslands. And we're exploring the potential for mark recapture projects, potentially putting some color bands on some birds to monitor pairs and mate retention and things like that. And then we're also hoping that this conservation officer could help recruit a lot more farmers into our stewardship program, which is one of the main avenues with which we disseminate all our conservation research into the application of on-the-ground conservation. And there is just a quick overview of our grassland biodiversity stewardship program. You can see quite a lot of hectareage, and it's through the project managers. You can see on the left there that we facilitate this relationship with the landowners and disseminate habitat management recommendations, specifically also helping to ensure habitats for secretary birds. And Melissa, I think, would like to add 1 or 2 things regarding this project.
No, thank you, Christiaan. A really comprehensive overview there, and just a nice note to end on. Please, if you are out there, if you own property or you know of friends, family members, colleagues who own properties, and they'd like to engage with us on ways to better manage those properties for things like secretary birds, do reach out to us. We have a phenomenal team of grassland conservationists, and we really are trying to use the secretary bird as the face of this grassland conservation, not just for them, but for all of the incredible biodiversity that live within this biome. And as we've shown you, it is one of South Africa's most threatened biomes. So we need all the help that we can get. Please do get in touch with us. BirdLife South Africa's landscape conservation team has made the grassland biome one of its biggest focus areas. So we are spread out across those Eastern Escarpment grasslands, but we're always looking to work further afield. So do get in touch with us, and certainly bringing that extra capacity in with the new Secretarybird Conservation Officer is a hugely exciting endeavor. And Christiaan, I must just congratulate you, because it really has been your hard work in working with the donors to make sure that we could make this happen. So congrats to you, and really looking forward to what the new incumbent will achieve. And anybody who's out there looking to join BirdLife South Africa, this is a phenomenal opportunity. So get those CVs in before the end of the deadline, which I believe is the middle of October, Christiaan, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct, Melissa.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, folks, there are many, many people to thank, organizations to thank. I've mentioned our donors, but just a huge thank you to them once again. So many moving parts to the Secretarybird project over the years. I cannot thank all of you enough for spending the evening with us to talk about these wonderful birds. And a big thank you to all our co-authors and Christiaan for your hard work this evening. And please do get in touch with us if you do have any questions or comments. We're going to be heading over to the AV Tourism segment again next week with a talk on Bloemfontein from the amazing Rick Nuttall. So do join us next week for another conservation conversation. But it's now on to the exciting questions sessions. So Christiaan, I hope you're ready for this. I saw eagle-eyed Eleanor Mary, one of our regulars, put a comment into the chat feed speaking about the fact that Johannesburg itself was once home to many secretary birds, and indeed of the 40% of grasslands that have been lost, much of what is the Johannesburg region falls within that category. I remember reading fondly about Warwick Tarboton's nests in the Midrand area, and certainly Mall of Africa and the many housing estates that have turned those grasslands into new developments no longer hold the secretary birds they once did. But that is change, and we've got to make sure that there are still landscapes where these birds can persist. And I see we've got a question. It's Galaxy A32. I'm not sure who the name is behind that, but they're asking, why has forestation taken over so much of our former grasslands? So Christiaan, I'm going to throw you in the deep end with this one. Do you want to speak a little bit to that, and I'll throw my 2 cents in afterwards?
Sure, Melissa, as the more trained botanist, I'll leave most of the explanation to you. But I'm assuming climate change plays some role in the change of CO2 in the atmosphere. That helps with things like bush encroachment, unfortunately. But of course, we also have a lot of invasives that over time have spread all over the place, as well as some drives for tree planting that is potentially happening in grasslands where it's not the most it's not good area. Of course, our grasslands have huge carbon sequestration capacity as well, and we don't necessarily want to be planting trees in those areas.
Yeah, definitely not. And if you haven't yet gone out and watched William Bond's amazing YouTube video as to why grasslands matter, I highly encourage you to jump on YouTube and search for William Bond and grasslands and spend the next 20 minutes learning about the incredible value of this ecosystem and why we shouldn't be actively afforesting all of these open landscapes. I also think one of the big challenges with our grasslands is being a naturally open landscape. It's a lot easier to transform than something like a savanna woodland, where one has to cut down many trees and move a lot of natural infrastructure. It's very easy to plow up a grassland and turn it into something else. They're also highly, highly fertile systems, so very sought after when it comes to cultivation. They're where a lot of our wetlands occur, so lots of good water sources. And that really has made them a desirable landscape for things like trees, which require a lot of water. And we've certainly seen the forestry industry take advantage of that over the last few decades. But we're going to switch tack now, Christiaan. And I know you spoke a bit about the incredible fencing project that you and Dr. Carl Lloyd are working on. And Marty Jasper is asking about changing the top wires of fences. And he says it makes sense in terms of preventing owls and birds getting caught on the barbs, but how are the farmers going to be convinced that it's a good idea? He feels that if they didn't need the barbs on the top wire, that they possibly wouldn't have had them on there. And have we got any case studies that could potentially help us swing the farmers to put those smooth wires on top?
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, thanks, Marty, for that question. It is an interesting one and somewhat a difficult one. So, I mean, that is one of the biggest hampers to the fence line thing, is the cost that a farmer needs to incur to perhaps change his fences. So that's why a lot of the awareness work is also to make farmers aware that it is an issue, so that future fences that they put up, also they employ these mitigation methods. We hope that everyone that can afford to do that, do the mitigations, would do it. But yeah, in terms of why they still use the top wire, I think to a large extent, it's probably just a convenience thing. Some of it will be perception regarding maybe they think it's a bit more effective in deterring the cattle a little bit more. But a lot of the case studies currently come out of America, out of their rangelands, where they've actually done a lot of research into these types of fence lines. And we have some academics working in that landscape and working with farmers in terms of getting their wildlife-friendly fences adopted. They have big issues with even things such as pronghorns getting entangled in their fences. And their studies pretty much have shown that the fences remain effective in keeping cattle in, and that there isn't really a requirement for some of the current design of fence lines. They can be changed to be more wildlife friendly and to consider wildlife when implementing without changing their effectiveness. So there are studies, but they are currently a lot of them, or the bulk of research, comes from those rangelands in Northern America. And we have a lot of academics working on the problem there that are advising on our project, which we are very grateful for.
Absolutely. Thanks, Christiaan. And I think, yeah, something we've always tried to underpin with our work at BirdLife is really getting that science in place, but still understanding the need to move with conservation action. And this is something that we really are trying to implement good conservation techniques where we suspect we've made some progress with those smooth wires, but certainly with the study that Christiaan's doing, it'll bring a new African perspective to our American colleagues' research. And we're looking forward to that study kicking off very soon. We've got a question from Revotile speaking around the main reason for protected areas not having many of the birds present and probably not servicing them as well as it should. I think I was the one who raised this with some of our work. Obviously, Revotile, with the current National Protected Area Network, much of what they're focusing in on is vegetation in a lot of cases. And plants in some cases require much smaller territories than our wide-ranging species. We're thinking the likes of not just secretary birds, but vultures and various others who range all over the place. And it is certainly difficult to expand our protected area network to encompass the wide ranges that a lot of these species do rely on. I think one of the only dedicated grassland reserves other than the Ukam-Plumba Drakensberg Reserve is Golden Gate National Park, and that's one of only a handful of parks that have really captured our grassland biome. I think less than 10% of our grassland biome currently falls under any sort of formal conservation protections. So we still have a long way to go, but as I said, it really does open up an opportunity for other effective conservation measures to be brought in, and sites with secondary conservation benefits like our cattle farms, if managed appropriately, can provide just as much biodiversity value as other landscapes that are under formal conservation. And Christiaan, I don't know if you want to speak to this as well in some of the areas that you've been looking at.
Yeah, Melissa, I think one of the things just to be cognizant of course, and that's why we are highlighting the agricultural landscape, is that because they're so wide-ranging, of course, any secretary bird within a protected area is gonna encounter the threats outside the protected area and the mortality causes thereof. So the protected area itself as a unit is not efficient to protect them. So you really have to be looking at the larger landscape. And when we look at the larger landscape, I think South Africa, what's it, 80% or something of our land is agricultural land, or 70% or something to that extent. So that just highlights why that sector is so important when it comes to conservation, because it's land that can be utilized in a way that pretty much supports the human endeavor while still being a viable habitat for functioning ecosystems.
Absolutely. Thanks, Christiaan. And I see Rob Simmons has joined us this evening. Always good to have him and his challenging questions with us. But Rob's asking about any evidence in a shift in range of the secretary bird predicted by climate change, particularly into potentially cooler areas or maybe out of the more hotter areas. Christiaan, do you want to have a stab at that?
Yeah, sure, Melissa. Yeah, as of yet, I don't think we're seeing necessarily that hard evidence of the broad scale movements. I think now, it's only now that the Kalahari, for instance, is experiencing increased, what do you call it, extreme heat events, and that Northern Cape landscape. So we're seeing some range shifts if we just look at the SABAP data. but there might also just be shifts in abundance that we currently know of. So as far as I know, there hasn't been research to link that directly with climate change. But yeah, that's part of the reason for our study, and it's definitely an important aspect to start investigating.
Absolutely. And I think what's so interesting about these birds is they do have a level of nomadism and adaptability, and they certainly do seem to push into areas that become suitable with the onset of good rains and move out of those areas when they again become too dry. They are capable of moving extremely far distances. And Rob, I believe it was one of your ring juveniles that went all the way from Sabi out to the Namibian National Park area. So certainly capable of going very, very far at young ages. So who knows? It's certainly something we're looking into. I liked seeing those little blue squares on Christiaan's Sabab 1 and Sabab 2 comparison in the Namakuru, because we know the Namakuru's grasslands are invading southwards, and perhaps those blue squares are an early trend that maybe the secretary birds are coming with them. So hopefully some opportunity for these birds to move into newer landscapes in the future, but what that'll look like is going to require a clever student who we luckily have on hand and can give you some answers to that in a couple of years' time. Christiaan, I see we've got another question from Rob, and he's asking, what habitat are secretary birds most reproductively successful? Now, I know we've been acquiring our nesting database, and certainly our grasslands are probably one of the most well-monitored landscapes. We have high densities of secretary bird nests in that landscape compared to other landscapes. But I think it's largely linked to rainfall. We've seen some very high productivity in our arid landscapes when there's good rainfall conditions. I'm not sure if you've got any other sentiments to add to that.
Yeah, I guess since they can wide so rangely, they probably a species that can also move into landscapes again. If, like you say, there's good rains in the area, they can move back into that area and utilize the increased prey populations that are associated with it. But Rob, those broad-scale trends are something we're looking to analyze. Of course, that's one of the functions of our nest database in the long term. Currently, we don't always have sort of the resolution of data to know whether the breeding was successful, how many chicks there was, that type of thing. But through sort of building participation, citizen science participation in that nesting database, we're hoping that we can start getting that long-term breeding success monitoring data at a national scale, if we get enough people to be enthusiastic enough about these wonderful birds to do some monitoring for us.
Absolutely. And I'm going to take one last question just because I'm conscious of time, Christiaan, but I think this is quite an interesting one and maybe something we should delve into in the upcoming months. Janet is saying, has there ever been a potential link explored between the game bird studies and our secretary bird distributions? Obviously, game birds are often an indicator of grassland health, and there could potentially be a link with secretary birds joining them. Janet, that's certainly a very interesting insight and something we could definitely potentially explore. Christiaan, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely is. I think the link would be the actual prey that they both utilize, or the indicators of, what a successful grassland is. So the game birds are functioning well, and then the secretary birds will function well as well. And there's a roundabout way of saying that from the diet studies, it seems that not that much of their diet is game birds. So the link wouldn't necessarily that you'd be exploring directly as a predator and its prey, just because I don't know how strong that link is. But of course, if a species that's very grassland orientated is functioning well, it is a good indication that other species that are very grassland orientated would also be flourishing in that habitat, that it is good grassland habitat. Yeah.
Absolutely. Christiaan, thank you so much for all of your hard effort this evening. It was certainly a very enjoyable conservation conversation, and I'm sure everyone has enjoyed hearing about the incredible Secretary Bird project. Are there any last sentiments before I wrap up for this evening from you?
Just a shout out to an old colleague of mine, Michaela. Michaela, I'll answer your questions after the webinar. And thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I appreciate your time. I hope you found it interesting. And I hope that you are enthusiastic about participating in our citizen science and assisting us in conserving this species.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christiaan. And apologies, Michaela, that we didn't get to your questions, but I'm glad that Christiaan will be able to chat you through those at a later stage. Thank you all so much for yet another fantastic Tuesday night. Remember, Rick Nuttall will be back with our next AV tourism show next week, birding Bloemfontein, the heart of South Africa, and the heart of the grasslands. So be sure to tune in. With that, keep your eyes on the skies, keep enjoying those birds, and I will see you again in the upcoming episodes. Thank you so much for spending your Tuesday with us, everyone. Keep safe. Hope your lights come back on soon, and we will see you next week. Good night, everybody.